Благодарим.
We would like to thank the Deputy Commissioner General of UNRWA, Mary DeMeo, and the humanitarian coordinator in the occupied Palestinian territory, Mr. Mohammed Handi. We thank them for detailed briefings and the objective assessment of the situation on the ground. The humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip continues catastrophic. After 300 days, one of the most densely areas in the world, out of that basically nothing remains, and the number of civilian victims is staggering. Almost 40,000 people killed and more than 90,000 wounded, two-thirds of them women and children. More than 50,000 bombs were dropped on the enclave. The housing stock is destroyed, as well as the civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and schools. The people in Gaza basically have no food, water, or medicine, to say nothing about basic hygiene. Wastewater is flooding the streets. There's rubble everywhere and unexploded ordnance. Those who survived the bombings and shellings have to continuously move around Gaza looking for shelter and safety. Some Palestinians, including those who have children, are changing their place of shelter for the 10th time. And once again, they end up under Israeli shelling because there are no safe places in Gaza left. Eyewitnesses of this, UN staff and humanitarians, all as one confirm this. And many of them confess that in their entire lives they haven't seen such horror, such suffering that an entire people is facing. And so far, unfortunately, there is no hope that these sufferings will end in the near future. Worse than that, one American reporter who spent a month in Gaza saw even that their snipers targeting children specifically. This is what you get from rhetoric stating that every Palestinian as of 3 years of age is a terrorist already. And this is something that we heard from some Israeli ministers at the initial stages of the conflict. Nor are we filled with optimism from the recent data from Han Yunis about those who died, wounded, and yet another evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people. There is a continued great risk of the confrontation spreading to beyond this strip to Lebanon and Syria. Other groups are becoming involved in the confrontation. The Houthis, for example, who delivered such a serious strike into Tel Aviv on the 19th July. We're also concerned of the fact that there is a low level of humanitarian response, and we probably shouldn't have expected anything else in the absence of a ceasefire. As a result of that, all of the humanitarian resolutions of the Council remain word on paper. The special mechanism on humanitarian supplies created under Security Council Resolution 2020 obviously is not bringing in any significant outcomes. The attempt to have a corridor between Cyprus and the floating pier has failed. The pier was designed for river conditions and it was simply washed out into the sea. The Rafah crossing, through which significant volumes of humanitarian supply used to be delivered, is closed. The roads through which supplies are to be delivered are destroyed. As far as we can tell, the Israeli authorities continue impeding humanitarian supplies. There is insufficient financing, and people who are locked in Gaza can only hope for external assistance because there is no manufacturing in the Gaza anymore, nor is there agriculture. The deconflicting and the proverbial notifications in the course of active hostilities are clearly not working either. And that's why we get such tragic high figures. 278 humanitarians died. Out of them, 197 used to be UNRWA staff. On the 21st of July, yet another humanitarian convoy into Gaza was shelled. And that's just the humanitarians. The victims are also to be counted amongst the reported. 170 died. The healthcare workers, 500 people. It is the time to sound the alarm bell and to do it regularly. That's why it's difficult for us to understand why some of the Western colleagues on the Council are bashfully sidestepping what is happening in Gaza and prefer convening meetings on other much less urgent topics. And this is not something that does do them honor at all. What is also at an impasse is an attempt to arrive at a settlement because of the disregard or insufficient attention to the interests of one of the conflicting parties. The Biden plan remains on paper, and we warned about that during voting on Resolution 2735. It became a spoiler of a kind and allows Israel, the United States, to contain any attempts by the Security Council members to raise another issues of another outcome of the Council, which would demand an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. We also very concerned by a continued disinformation campaign about UNRWA. As far as we understand, the most disreputable allegations by Israel about UNRWA staff were not confirmed, whereas the conclusions by the group of experts headed by Ms. Colonna confirmed that UNRWA is in line with the principle of neutrality and plays a key role in providing assistance to the Palestinians. Members of the Security Council should not play along with the attempts to discredit the agency. We call upon everyone to rise up in its defense. There is no alternative to UNRWA, and this understanding should be the starting point of the Council's efforts. Draft Knesset resolution aiming to ban UNRWA in West Jerusalem and acknowledging the agency as a terrorist organization can only be interpreted as a slap delivered to the entire United Nations. We call on Israeli authorities to uphold the norms of international humanitarian law and to bear full responsibility for the people under occupation. I refer to, first of all, to the obligations to ensure food supply, health care, and public law and order. What is also needs to happen is the halt to the settlements on the occupied Palestinian territory. It is an egregious violation of international law. It is because of such actions by the Israeli authorities we notice that recently there's been an intensification, the situation in the West Bank. It's now nearing an explosion point. We have stated on several occasions at the same time that we're against violence and terrorism in all of its manifestations, against attacks against peaceful civilians any place, in any country. This applies also, of course, to attacks on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, which we unconditionally and immediately condemned. There is no justification for this. But what is happening in Gaza can only be called a collective punishment and an attempt to totally eliminate the civilian population. Israel, of course, does have the right to ensure its security, but the path towards that goal, with any doubt, is only through a comprehensive Middle East settlement, and first and foremost through rectifying historic injustice against Palestine and through creating an independent Palestinian state in line with the Security Council and General Assembly decisions. Any other questionable mechanism to reconcile Israel with its neighbors without a just resolution of the Palestinian issue will not bring us to this goal and can only provoke outbursts of violence similar to what the region is living through now. Distinguished colleagues, what we need to do now is pool our efforts in support of a just Israeli-Palestinian settlement on the basis of the international legal basis endorsed by the Council, and ensuring that would finally improve the situation in the region. There should be no monopolization of the mediation efforts, which we have been seeing recently in U.S. action, nor should it be a competition amongst main actors. All aspects is important. All effort in the initiative is of import. And in this context, we welcome what was arrived at recently in the Chinese capital, the understanding that is between the representative of Fatah and Hamas, which crowned a whole slew of preparatory meetings, including in Moscow. Palestinian Union is a guarantee that the interests of the Palestinian people will not be ignored once again. We expect that this success will have a positive impact on the ongoing negotiations on the release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners, which should finally lead to the ceasefire the people of Gaza need so much.
The conflict in Gaza has been going on for over 9 months, causing an unprecedented, ever-worsening humanitarian catastrophe, with nearly 40,000 innocent civilians' lives lost. The red lines of international law and international humanitarian law have been crossed repeatedly. The unfolding tragedy in Gaza is testing the moral conscience of humanity and rocking the very foundation of international justice. It will be remembered as a stain in human history, one that is hard to scrub off. We cannot help but ask, how many more lives must be lost? How many more women and children must die? And how many more homes must be destroyed before this tragedy can cease, before the flames of war in Gaza can die down? It has been almost 2 months since Security Council Resolution 2735 was adopted. While certain countries keep asserting that negotiations for a ceasefire are underway, Israel has continued its large-scale military operations over the past 2 months, from Rafah to Khan Yunis, from IDP camps to hospitals, from UN schools to the quote-unquote safe zones designated by Israel. The bombings and attacks have not stopped even for a moment, and innocent civilians are dying each and every single day. Civilian lives must not be used as a bargaining chip for negotiations, and military offensives cannot create the conditions for the release of hostages. Negotiations mustn't go on indefinitely. There isn't a moment to lose when lives are at stake. And alleviating the humanitarian catastrophe allows no delay. We urge Israel to immediately cease all military operations in Gaza. And we urge the United States to put greater pressure on Israel to help bring about an immediate ceasefire. China supports the Council in taking further actions that are necessary to push for the implementation of the relevant resolutions. China reiterates that humanitarian issues mustn't be politicized and that starvation mustn't be turned into a weapon of war. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA, operating under the GA mandate, is the mainstay of humanitarian assistance in Gaza. China is firmly opposed to attempts to attack and discredit UNRWA and to throw a spanner in the works of UNRWA's mandate implementation. In an alarming development, an UNRWA humanitarian transport vehicle was recently shot at by Israeli forces. The safety and security of humanitarian workers must be ensured, and the incident in question must be thoroughly investigated and those responsible held accountable. China urges Israel to genuinely fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law by opening all land crossings to give rapid access to humanitarian deliveries at scale and provide security and other required assistance to humanitarian agencies. China reiterates that the implementation of the two-state solution is the only viable way to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Settlement activities in Jordan, in the West Bank, violate international law and relevant Security Council resolutions and chip away at the foundation of the two-state solution, which we firmly oppose. All settlement activities must be halted, and the ever-worsening settler violence must be effectively curbed. China has always been a staunch supporter of the restoration of the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people as a nation. Earlier this week, the intra-Palestinian groups held a reconciliation dialogue in Beijing and reached an important consensus, which is a significant step forward towards operationalizing the principle of Palestinians governing Palestine and preparing for post-war governance in Gaza. China firmly supports independent Palestinian statehood and calls for a broader-based, more authoritative and more effective international peace conference to work out a timetable and a roadmap for the implementation of the two-state solution with a view to putting the Palestinian question back on the right track towards a political settlement. President, the negative spillover effects of the Gaza conflict are spreading, echoed by other conflicts at multiple points in the region, and the situation between Lebanon and Israel and the developments in the Red Sea are troubling. Allowing the flames of war and the instability to spread even further would only lead to a catastrophe that engulfs the entire region. China calls on all parties concerned to exercise calm and restraint and to refrain from any action that would exacerbate the tensions. China is ready to work with the rest of the international community in a tireless effort to bring an early end to the war in Gaza, mitigate the impact of the havoc, and help the two-state solution become a reality so that Palestine and Israel can live alongside each other in peace, and durable peace and stability can prevail in the Middle East. I thank you, President.
Rarely does a president confront so much peril: the catastrophe in Israel, the war in Ukraine, and no help from a paralyzed Congress. Late Thursday, we met President Biden at the White House. It had been a rough week, and we could see it on him. Mr. Biden will be 81 next month, and he has said that when he's tired, his lifelong stutter can creep back in. But he wedged us into his schedule to express his commitment to Israel after the massacre of more than 1,000 civilians 8 days ago. 29 Americans were killed, 15 are missing, and at least a small number of them are known to have been taken hostage. In a video call on Friday, Mr. Biden had this message for Americans in Israel whose loved ones have vanished.
We're saying we're going to do everything in our power to find those who are still alive and set them free. Everything in our power. And I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but